I think my brother Justin also deserves a ton of credit for all his work on this beautiful barn. I'm pretty sure that when Abby got engaged and said she wanted to get married here, it sent Justin into straight panic mode, trying to figure out how he was going to get his projects all done in time, but it turned out even better than we could have imagined. I know his YouTube subscribers are anxiously awaiting several videos of this summer's projects and to see how that deck finally turned out. As I sat down to write this speech, I thought back on my childhood.
I felt like installing the side railings on the deck should be top priority, as it's going to make everything else I work on a lot safer. Before I could install the railings, though, I had to put the siding up on this upper part of the barn, because the railings attach through the siding into the barn post behind them. Once again, I have to take quite a few steps backwards before I can start moving forwards. I carefully pulled off all the old siding. I planned to reuse as much of it as I could. I thought it would be nice to have an electrical outlet up on the deck, and I also want to have some lights up there, so I installed some boxes, ran some wire to them, and then I also decided to just go ahead and run it down to the electrical box and get the plug installed. It's kind of getting sick of running extension cords all the way up there. I chased the wire across the top of my barn and then through a hole into the wall adjacent to the deck. Leaving a couple feet hanging out the electrical box, I neatly ran the wire back to the breakers, taking out the slack along the way. This was the second plug-in I'd gotten installed in my barn, and it was up on top of my deck. Yeah, that probably makes sense. I labeled the new breaker with the best handwriting I could muster. Jeez, I write like a 6-year-old. Next up was the sheathing. I held a couple up there by hand, and that wore me out. So I loaded up the front of the forklift and lifted it up there, which is a little bit better. I always like putting up the plywood because it makes the wall feel really strong and gives you a better sense of what the structure is going to feel like. I drilled some holes at the locations of the corners of the electrical box and then just zipped it out with my jigsaw. Kind of some funny shapes up top here. Along the top of my barn is a wooden track that has a hoist on it that they used to use to bring in loads of hay into the hayloft. I just think it looks cool, and the hoist is actually still on the inside, and so I really want to leave it there and maybe hang some lights off it down the road.
Drake, nail gun, now!
Once I got all the plywood up, I started wrapping it in Tyvek. I don't know how it works out this way, but I always seem to be putting this stuff up on the windiest days. It's really hard to do by yourself. And this stuff sounds like a snare drum too in the wind. And then, unfortunately, the weather got even worse on me. Sure, it looked pretty, but it definitely wasn't prime deck building weather. especially having not gotten my side railings up yet. A little slippery. So I went back inside and accidentally came out 5 months later. Now, what was I working on up here? Yeah, so I got up in some other projects, both on the farm and in the barn, and I put the deck on hold. But at least I had nice weather now. I had to use some new wood for the center of this upper part, where it wasn't sided originally.
Big step out here.
Then my grandpa stopped by. I'm working on putting the siding up.
Oh,
Doing this right here, finishing it. So I'm gonna put up the rest of the wood, and then I'm gonna do the hand railings.
Handrails.
I had to finish the wood first because it's gonna get mounted to the building.
Sure, yeah,
Excited to get the railings down now, so it's a little safer up here.
yeah. Well, I've been wanting to buy some chrysanthemums to put in one of our beds, and I can't find them in Albany, so we're headed down to Al's, down at Woodburn, to see if he's got them.
Careful going down and watch that hose there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Got a little distracted while talking to my gramps, and I thought I cut the board short, but luckily I just grabbed the wrong side. That's better. Now that I had the siding up, it's time to finally get back to working on the railings. For all of my barn, I've used 1 inch by 3 inch by 1/8 inch rectangular tubing for the top handrail. I think it's a good size, kind of fits your hand and I like the shape of it. One side of these I welded a plate that I can sink some lag screws through into the barn, but the other side will just be welded directly onto the metal beam that supports the deck. Got a pretty good fit where it kind of held itself in place, but I still grabbed a strap to raise it up to the right height before welding the other side onto the beam. With all this old wood, I always drill it out first before driving into the leg screws. Stuff splits really easy, and it's always a bad feeling when that happens. Just getting ready to work on the other side when I noticed that every time I pounded on the wall, a swarm of bees started coming out. I went and looked on the inside of my barn, and there's a hive the size of a volleyball up in the peak that I had somehow never seen. So I decided to put that off for a little bit. Cut some 1.5 inch square tubing to form the uprights and the bottom bars, which I also drilled holes in that I'll run the cables through. I happened across a couple Irish girls looking for work, and so I hired them to help me paint the railing when I get it covered before more rain came. I was going to help as well, but unfortunately I could only find 2 paintbrushes. Don't forget to get the underside of the railing.
How much do I get if I flash the camera?
You get a lot of likes. I'll get a lot of likes, I guess, actually.
Hopefully I can hire them again in the future. They do really good work. I made a bunch of these lantern cages for lights in the loft inside my barn, and I had a couple extra, which I thought would look nice out on the deck. The lanterns inside the barn hang from the rafters, but these ones I'm installing on the deck I want to have hanging from the wall, so I needed to make some kind of bracket to hold them. I drew a box in SketchUp and then flattened it out and cut it on the CNC table. After cutting some fold lines with the angle grinder, I stuck one end in the vise and folded it over. Really want to get a box and pan brake one day. But for now, the poor man's version works pretty well too. I TIG welded the corners and then blended them using a flat disc on the angle grinder again. And lastly gave it a light sanding to give the patina that I wanted to apply a little bit to bite. So that's the box that'll get mounted to the wall. But I still need a bracket that comes out and actually holds the lantern. And I thought this would be a good excuse to fire up my new forge. This was a Christmas present from my parents. And oh man, it was so nice compared to using the oxyacetylene torch like I used to be using. Once I got it all welded together, I took it back down to my barn where I cleaned it up with some acetone to remove any of the oils. And then I sprayed it down with some Japanese brown patina. I've learned that if the patina beads up on the metal, it's just not going to work. And so what I usually do is just rub it in, and it seems to get a lot better result. I've also learned that you should see a reaction on the metal right away. If you don't, it's probably not going to be that much different the next morning when you come out. After giving it a couple days to rust, I washed it off with water. And then once it was completely dry, I gave it a shot of clear enamel to protect it. With the dust flying out of the combines in the perennial ryegrass field next to the barn, I got to work mounting my lights. Had a little bit of time until the seed trucks were full, so I thought I might as well make use of it. One small thing I wish I had done different in hindsight on these lanterns would be to have installed a couple little loops for the electrical wire to run through. I ended up using a couple small zip ties, which you can barely see, but still wish I had done that. I cut a backing plate and got the wire fed through it and then screwed into the wall. I felt like I needed to do this because the bat on the board and bat siding will butt up against it. After wiring up the socket, it was ready to go on the wall. I always try to time my light installs, so I finish it up just as the sun's going down. Makes it much more dramatic to turn on for the first time. Even if you wire it wrong and you just get an explosion of sparks, you still want to see that at night, right? Got the switch installed on the inside, and then the last thing to do was to stick some bulbs in it. Bought some Edison bulbs, which I think are really cool because you can see the elements, and just felt like it matched the style of the lantern. And they give off a really nice color too. All right, making progress on this deck again. See you again in another 7 months.